as any good researcher, what you do is you observe something and then you ask why. And you search for those answers, come up with hypotheses and search for answers. So he discovered that the sea solids were integral in both the plant, animal, and human health. I'm going to go just a little bit off script here. So if we are looking at the composition or the nutrients that are in ourselves or in our animals or in our soils, there was a base layer of the minerals that were in all the environments years ago. And as time has gone on, there's been a depletion, kind of a serial depletion of these minerals, whether you call them the macro minerals or the trace minerals. How I like to describe it, we are all very aware of things like calcium and phosphorus and magnesium, those essential minerals that we need in large quantities in our body. There has been a lot of research done on what they would call the trace minerals. But typically when they're talking trace minerals, they're talking about things like zinc and copper and selenium and cobalt, things that they know we need in lesser quantities but are still very vital for life and function. I like to use the word microtrace minerals, and those would be the ones that, number one, we don't know how much we need of them, but we do know that there are enzyme systems that require these microtraces. When you look at the word C90, the 90 refers to 90 trace minerals that would be found in ocean water. Okay. Now, significance of the microtraces and enzymes. Enzymes run biological systems, and an enzyme is comprised of a base vitamin or a base trace mineral. If that base is not there, if that most efficient trace mineral is not present, the biological system has to have a workaround. So I like to describe it as, say that you have an enzyme that has cesium or yttrium or a lot of these other minerals that you really can't pronounce or don't know much about. The most efficient way for a system to work is to go from point A to point B. If you're lacking some of those microtraces, what ends up happening is you have to go from point A to point B to point C. You have to have a workaround. The body's very good at this. But all of these are energy users in the body. And if you think about something like our immune system, if we are making the body work harder, or if we're making a plant work harder to be able to accomplish what it wants to accomplish, it's going to involve decreased productivity, decreased activity in the immune system, decreasing the ability to perform at its highest level. Right? This slide here, you can see it shows what has happened to the nutrient density of our food with regards to some of those macro minerals that we were talking about. How does that happen? Well, a number of different ways. If you look at systems before commercial agriculture, it was very much, as Reed said, a cyclical thing. It was animals would be on land, animals would harvest some of the plant material, they would put material back into the soil one way or the other, through the manure or through their decomposition, and it was kind of a complete system. What have we done as we have gotten to commercial agriculture? We are pulling things out of the soil, we're moving them off the farm. So for an example, if years ago when the farms, the small farm paradigm, had chickens, they had cattle, they had hogs, they raised oats, they raised small grains, they raised hay, they had pasture, they had corn, this all kind of a recycling. What do we do now, especially in commercial agriculture? We take massive harvests, massive yields out of our soil and move them someplace else. Now, that's not necessarily an issue as long as we're replenishing what they're taking away. But essentially what we're doing is we're mining the soil. We're taking our soil, those traces, those small amounts of things that we need, and we're moving them off the farm. We can replace them. But there's been many, many years, many decades here now where that's not been something that is considered in the commercial world. In the organic world, it's a much different situation. Because we can't use chemical fertilizers, we are using things that are more natural. The things that are more natural tend to have a lot of those traces as part of it. So we're working at replenishing, or at least replacing what we're taking off the farm. So on the slide, how does it leave? Rita mentioned erosion. That's certainly one way. The crops that we're taking off and moving, that's certainly another way. Wind can move things too. So a number of ways that we're losing things, losing our topsoil, and losing those nutrients. So Dr. Murray's key learnings with his research, you can read it on the slide. Ocean life is strong and thriving, naturally mineral-rich environment. If you look at systems, then there is a lot of correlation between ocean water and, say, our blood in terms of the percentages of water, the percentages of salts, and the composition. If you look at soil, you look at what feeds the plants in the soil, they have very similar requirements. So when we look at ocean water, this is something that is constantly replenished, or it's always at a steady state, as opposed to what we're talking about, like with land or with our animals, where we may not be replacing exactly what they need. Now, we have the ability to be able to get those nutrients out of the ocean and use that as replenishment for our systems. Okay, the ocean water research. You can read on the slide, Dr. Murray, and Robert Keane, who was the person who owned the company, started the company and owned the company here prior to the new owners, the Sillick family. They had used the ocean water as a fertilizer, so they were actually able to grow things in ocean water. We have the concept that salt is a bad thing, and this is one question that I get a lot with regards to how much salt should our animals have. Can we put salt on our soil? But when you think about it, any living system, any living creature, be it a plant or be it an animal, has to have sodium in their system. They have to have some of those key nutrients to maintain cell walls, to do cell multiplication. So it isn't a matter of salt being a bad thing. It's a matter of it needs to be there, it needs to be in a form that is going to be the most biologically active or the most biologically safe. All right, all minerals exist for a reason. This would kind of reference to what I was saying. There's different levels of minerals, trace minerals that the body needs or that systems need, plants need, and we have identified some of the major ones. If you've heard the expression in conventional agriculture, they would talk about NPK, so nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. All right, those are key ones. Those are large requirements in growing our crops. And as more research comes, as people become more aware, we identify that there are more of these that we need. And then on the right-hand side, you would see the list of many of the ones that are in much less quantity. So introducing the C90, Dr. Murray was, I'm sorry, this PowerPoint I didn't see until this morning, so kind of bear with me with that. Kind of a key part off of this is that if you're looking at the term sea salt versus sea solids, there's going to be a distinction between that. I'll get to that in a little bit. One of the key components, though, when you're talking about energies, we can talk about individual atoms, about individual elements, but there's an energy, there's a frequency associated with everything. For the same reason that you can have a chemically manufactured product is going to perform differently than a naturally produced product. Some of that is going to be very much due to the energy that it has, the frequency that it has. The world is made, everything is frequency, everything has a frequency. And with frequency, if you think about frequency, there's wave functions, all right? So waves, like so. If you have frequencies that are going to be beneficial, they're going to be synergistic, meaning your waves can be higher. If you're going to have things that are of a different frequency, you can lower that wave. So it's competing. Think of one going this way, one going this way. You reduce the frequency, you would reduce the energy associated with it. Since all systems are run by energy, it's always advantageous to have synergies. It's always advantageous to have those frequencies match. Now, where does that come into play? If things are lacking and you have to go these alternative routes, you have decreased some of that efficiency from the energetic level. Okay, we'll go a little bit into why C90, where it comes from, why it's significant from where it comes from, and what is the difference between the C90 and some of the other salts that are out there. C90 is coming from the Sea of Cortez, which is in Baja, Mexico. The product is actually coming from Mexico. So this map shows where it's going to be. It's going to be in the far northern end of the bay. And the way that it's harvested is there are tide pools. So these white and pinkish type rectangles that you see, or squares that you see, these are areas where periods of extremely high tide will flood these tide pools. And then over time, over a period of months, you dry out the water. So the process is only happening by wind and by sunshine. There's nothing that is being done from a mechanical standpoint to harvest this salt. If you notice kind of on that picture, you'll see there's kind of different colors in those different tide pools in the different areas. That is kind of the biological life that's expressing itself as that water is being evaporated out. These are just some pictures of kind of the process, what it is. These salt flats, if you will, with the evaporated sea minerals, just when they get to a certain point, they can be harvested and would go to a packaging plant over there. Okay. So now, what's going to separate out? This is kind of the meat and potatoes of it. There's a lot of salts that are out there. There's a lot of sea minerals that are out there, and I'd just like to point out, from my understanding, what some of the important differences are. When you are looking at the sea minerals in seawater, okay, we think of it, I used to think of it as, okay, an ocean it's salt and water, right? There's salt, there's water. But if you look at the particular area where this sea mineral is being harvested, it's considered to be one of the most biologically diverse and most biologically active parts of the ocean. You have an area, it's ocean water, but it's protected. Because it's protected, it is going to warm up. You're going to have a little bit higher temperatures there, and life is going to flourish. Now, in ocean water, there are just myriads of different types of microorganisms. So it can be bacteria. If you've heard the term plankton, and things like whales eat plankton. Okay, what is plankton? Plankton is this combination of either plant or animal materials. The phytoplankton would be the plant type. And these are bacteria, they're algae, they're fungi, they're protozoans, all sorts of little critters that are there. The significance of that is that each of those organisms contain these minerals, they contain carbon, and they contain sodium. So when they're drying down the seawater, all of those components are also in the sea mineral. A significance of that is if all of your salt, all of your sodium chloride is just in the form of sodium chloride as a solute in water, that isn't much different than what you would have, say, with a Morton's white salt. It's sodium and chloride. But a percentage of the sodium in the C90 is going to be within the structure of these microorganisms. I get a lot of questions of, well, but excessive salt is bad for you. And what I like to point out is that when you're looking at salt coming into a body, coming into a person or into an animal, if it's simply the chemical sodium chloride, it creates a pressure gradient, or not pressure, osmotic gradient. So across membranes serve to provide protection. You want to have kind of homeostasis within the cell. If in the intestinal tract you have a large amount of sodium chloride, and it's there, on the other side of the membrane, on the other side of the cells in the gut, you have a lower amount of sodium chloride within those cells. When you have an osmotic difference like that, then the sodium and chloride is going to move across to kind of equilibrate. We're talking about things like edema, we're talking about high blood pressure, heart issues being related to sodium, kidney issues being related to too high of a sodium. Part of that is that you have that gradient, you take in too much sodium, it gets into the system, the body has to deal with it. All right. Now, picture having your sodium enclosed within all these little microorganisms that are in the ocean. Now when that gets into the gut, they're not immediately released, so that it's going to be a slow digestion. The sodium is available for the body to absorb if it needs it. If it doesn't need it, it can pass through. So we are creating a situation where the body has the choice to be able to absorb the sodium and the chloride. And in practice, in the veterinary world, I've seen so many situations where, if any of you have livestock, udder edema in cattle prior to having their calves comes from high sodium levels, can come from high sodium levels. You don't see a situation like that when they're consuming it as a C90 because of that. That also holds true for a lot of the other trace minerals that are out there. Now, when we talk about, well, I guess there's going to be a slide on the call, hold on. Okay. First step in regenerative agriculture, I'm not one to talk a great deal about the soil part of it, only from the standpoint of what I had mentioned. You have microorganisms in the soil that's going to parallel microorganisms in our gut, our microbiome, which is going to parallel what goes on, like say, in a rumen of a cow or a sheep or a goat. So in terms of some protocols here for improving the soil health, a couple different ways of doing it. It certainly can be broadcasted. It can be something that is applied as part of your fertilizer program. And again, we are looking at trying to provide these trace minerals. Are we going to be providing enough by using C90 to get the calcium level up in our soil? No, it's not going to do that. That's not the basis. That's not what we're looking to do. We're looking to provide those trace minerals and the microtraces for the soil. All right. When people will ask the question, well, should we be putting salt on our soil? Will that be an issue? Okay, think of it this way. I don't know what the pounds are, but if you look at the number of pounds of soil in the top 4 inches of an acre is a lot of weight. I said I don't know the number. If you're putting 100 pounds of salt on, that's going to be inconsequential with relation to the amount of weight, the amount of mass that's in 4 inches of an acre of ground. But because of the concentration of the trace minerals, having that small amount of salt put on your land is going to provide a significant amount of those trace minerals, those microtraces. Because again, remember, we don't need much, we just need a little bit, just looking at replacing what would have been there from years ago. Okay? When you're feeding the soil, you're feeding the biology of the soil. And this is something that is in this group, as you go around the different booths, as you go to the different seminars, people are talking about the biology of the soil. How significant is that? This is another one of those things that we are feeding the biology, try to get the biology working. Because it is through the biology that the plants are going to be healthier, they're going to be more efficient in terms of producing the, whether it's the seeds that we're harvesting or the forage that we're harvesting. Below ground management, above ground results, just kind of refers to that. You can see on the slide with that. Another way of application is going to be through foliar spraying. Foliar spraying is providing small amounts of things to the plant on the leaves so that it can be pulled in through the leaves. If you look at what has to happen with minerals, with inorganic minerals, meaning rock type of minerals in the soil, is that for plants to uptake them, they have to be broken down. And that's kind of the role of some of the fungi. There is a relationship between soil bacteria and fungi in the roots. So when you are doing a foliar feeding, you're entirely bypassing that process. Anything that you're putting in on the leaves can be drawn into the leaves, into the cells of the plant. It's a much more direct and efficient way of providing some of the nutrients that those plants need as they're growing. Okay. Improving composting. There certainly is the benefit of composting organic matter, and part of that is, again, the biology. You're looking at having nutrients that are going to be broken down by bacteria. When it's broken down by bacteria, it's much more available and much easier to be integrated into our plants. Okay, good. Oh, sure. So this would be the formula. Okay. All right. The root density, the plant tissue growth that can come. And many of you would maybe know Gary Zimmer had conversation this morning. Certainly don't want to come across that using C90 on your soil is going to correct all the things that might need to happen to the soil. It is one part of the program. So it's like fundamentally, basically, you need to have the right proportion, you need to have the right pH, you need to have the right amount of calcium, available calcium in your soil. You need to be able to maintain that biological life. This is something that adds to that. So, okay, now with regards to the animal vitality, we have some of the things here. Okay.